Okay, so we're ready to start our bat rep. My friend James is here. Say hi, James.
Hola,
do you give your permission to be on camera?
I'm not Captain Anonymous.
And I can, yeah. All right. So anyway, he's playing Ogres, and he's going to break 8th edition right before our very eyes. Okay, go.
Okay.
Start from the top. People aren't playing 8th edition.
Well, it's not that they aren't. There's this big debate that's going on right now. And I'm not sure why, but some people are choosing to follow 7th edition rules,
Okay.
7th and 6th edition rules. For instance, like the Ogre Kingdoms book. This book came out in 6th edition and was written for 6th edition rules.
Right.
Came out in 7th edition. They didn't do a new book. They errated this book, trying to make it fit into 7th edition. And then now 8th edition. So we're 2 editions old for a 6th edition Army book.
Right.
So there's a lot of stuff going on in this book.
But you got the FAQ, right?
You got the FAQ.
Okay.
Okay, so the FAQ states to ignore some things.
Right.
On the FAQ here, it says to ignore page 66 and 67.
Which is what?
It says, ignore these pages and use the rules for choosing your army in the Warhammer Rulebook.
Okay.
Okay? That's a total contradiction to how things used to work with codexes. Codexes always overrode basic rulebooks.
Right.
Except for in this case, the basic rulebook even says on page 134, I don't know if you can get a shot of that.
Oh, that's fine. Okay.
Right here it says older books. It says in a one-off contradiction to what we say in the beginning at page 11, some older books have a different selection system than the one presented here.
Right.
Ignore that selection system.
Right.
Only use the one presented here.
Okay, so how does that affect your army?
Well, things...
He's working his case up.
He's
working the case. He's establishing the facts.
If I didn't have an 8th edition rulebook, and all I had was an old Ogres Codex, and I was building my list, Ogres are one of the few armies still that have 0 to 1 restrictions.
Right.
And in the case of
But
Bulls...
those are gone now.
In the case of Bulls, they have 1+ restrictions.
Right.
Okay? The entire book says nothing about 1+, 0 to 1, anything like that. They say use these restrictions for choosing wars.
Oh, I get it.
Now, some people, this is where the argument comes in.
Okay,
because they say, okay, well, that's a selection system. These are restrictions. 2 different things. But, in the FAQ, it says to ignore certain pages in this book.
Right.
So let's turn to those pages.
All right.
On page 66, this is the old selection system that had how many characters and things like that. We know that's gone.
Right.
But the top of 67 says, in some cases, other limitations or requirements may apply, in particular, to certain units.
Oh, so that's gone, too.
Okay.
Oh, he's sliding into home here, folks.
Now, some people say, okay, well, they errated that page, but they didn't say, go to that page and ignore the 1+. And yada.
Right.
Okay, you're right. They didn't say to do that.
I understand.
But if you were just playing this, and let's say that page that explains what these numbers are, you wouldn't know what they meant, right? But also... just underneath the first paragraph, it says unit entries. Each unit is represented in the army list, the unit's name is given, and any limitations that are applied are explained.
Right.
So again, if you ignore
but that page is gone.
That page is gone.
So it really just gets rid of this.
Anything that had a limitation before,
right?
You're ignoring any of that selection system for pigeonholing your army, because Ogres, for the longest time, you had to take 1 unit of Bulls. So there was 200-something points probably gone right there. Then, if you want to take Noblars, for every unit of Noblars you took, you had to take a unit of Bulls.
restriction on that.
There's a restriction on that. Then, in the specials, scrap launchers, there's a restriction that says...
Can you hold on a second? Okay, so James is making a great case. But what he doesn't realize is that I'm the judge. And so you can have house rules. And I can just tell you right now, I find this to be completely reasonable and lovely. In fact, I have always been in favor of getting rid of those restrictions.
Which, if you look at all
especially
the 7th
for Ogres.
Books, look at all the 7th edition books. Tell me one 7th edition book that still has a 0 to 1 restriction, or a 1+ restriction. There isn't one.
Oh, okay.
They've all gone away.
Right.
I mean, look at Empire. Empire,
yeah, I remember
I think, was
that.
one of the first ones that came out in 7th edition. Things like steam tanks used to be 0 to 1.
Right.
Great swords, I believe, were 0 to 1.
Right.
They're not anymore.
They got rid of
steam
that.
tanks not 0 to 1 anymore.
Now you're really off the leash with Ogres, if that's the right interpretation.
The way that I
they
see it
didn't FAQ that then?
the way that it's fact is just ignore that page, and it's that page that explains all the limitations. Because the basic rule book doesn't cover limitations at all. The only thing it says for limitations is you have duplicate limits in your specials and your rares. Doesn't say anything about some entries. Unit entries and all that stuff isn't explained here. So if it's erased from the Codex and there's nowhere else you can find it, it's gone. That's my opinion, is that if you're using the Codex as your basis for determining, yeah, some things have restrictions, but that page that describes those restrictions is gone. You
then
have
it's
to
irrelevant.
The hard thing is
this how you have to argue the case at the local game shop when you show up with
this is my first game in 8th edition.
Really?
I've simply been at home going,
because this sounds so practiced.
No, but it's one of those things. It's like so many people tend to forget that we're playing a new edition.
Right.
And new editions sometimes break old edition rules. Yeah. There are some armies, Bretonnians, another example, Bretonnians, you had to have a unit of Knights Realm. Knights of the Realm.
Not
it
so
specifically
anymore.
says so. And here's another defense for that, that they've gotten rid of it, is because if you look in the Knights, or sorry, in the Bretonnian Codex, FAQ errata, they go into more detail about removing 1+ restriction.
Oh, okay.
Because
so do they say it's no longer 1+?
It's printed in 2 spots. It's printed on their selection list, like the Ogres have.
Right.
But then on the core selection page, it says, remember, you must always take a unit of Knights of the Realm. You have to have at least one. They errated that, too.
To get rid of that.
To get rid of that.
Nice.
So, I'm terrible at editing.
Bring it home, because I'm really starting to doze off here.
Doze off. So, to bring it home, all old limitations no longer apply, unless in the FAQ errata that's come out for each army, they specifically give a breakdown for it.
Right.
My example is Dwarves. Dwarves, if you follow the rules and you follow their errata, they've eliminated the 0 to 1 restriction for Dwarves, which would mean you could take 2 anvils, or 3 anvils, or however many you could fit.
Wow.
Except for, in the errata, they specifically give a new entry for it.
Oh, so that indicates
in that they explain
you would need that.
You can only take 0 to 1 of these.
I get it.
So, it's given a new profile in the errata, and they even go in depth into explaining the fact that it's a 0 to 1 and what that means.
Which implies the other places where they didn't errata it, it's not.
It's gone. Unless they give you a limitation in the errata, you ignore all limitations and use the selection system.
You know, I'm going to put this up as a separate YouTube video.
Okay.
And then we'll get a firestorm of opinion. That'll be fun.
So there's been so many people that have just like sent me personal messages. It's like, dude, how did you figure this out? It's like, I read the rule book.
Awesome.
When I got my rule book,
hey, look,
I
it just
went
walked
home.
in. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Heather, and I read it. I think a lot of people bought the rule book, went home, looked at the pretty pictures, and just looked for the changes, and they didn't look in depth into like how the actual game is meant to be played. And if you watch any of the GW videos they put out, they've really kind of hinted towards, we want you to build your army. We don't want you to build an army that we've pre-designed for you. We want you to have this as your field. You build your army with these slight limitations. 25%, core has to be there. That's it. We don't care how you get to it.
I think that's awesome. Hey, thanks, James.
Yep.